And waiting as usual, setting up for YouTube Live. They really should have like a counter at the end that this says 3, 2, 1.
Well, that's it, because I think on this and on Substack, where we're doing a few things, it's difficult to know whether you're actually ready or not. Some people are watching. There's a couple of seconds.
It is, but I think we're live now. So, hi guys, and welcome back to Brain Friendly Thinking. I'm back with Karthik, and we are continuing to think through and develop our thinking tools book. Last time when we left off, we started thinking about, or put another way, I think we have a general idea of what we want to do, and we thought that it's a good idea to have at least one example, maybe several examples, who knows? That's something we can discuss today, but at least one example that shows how different thinking tools can be used to solve. Well, I don't want to use the word solve a problem, but to think through a situation, think through a problem. The reason for that is originally we had intended to have one problem and then what thinking tool could you use for that? But in our discussion 2 weeks ago, yeah, we arrived at the point where we said this might be a bit too mechanistic, a bit too not really useful, because you can very easily get into a very general taxonomy of thinking tools that might be very interesting from an academic point of view, but not from a user's point of view. They are then very difficult to decide which one to take. And we ended on the note that Karthik, you suggested potentially using a careers path as an example.
Yes, I
And
think,
yeah,
I suppose, it might be worth summarizing very briefly where we
mhm,
got to last time as an approach. Because I was looking back at my notes as well and just trying to remember kind of the architecture that we were coming around. So maybe if I just remind you of kind of where we got to the last time of the conversation. I think we realized that there was three things that we wanted to try and talk about. So rather than having a list of tools, I think we talked about a framework within
mhm,
which the tools would kind of live. And that framework very generally was a bit like a matrix. And the idea was we have stuff that, is known and stuff that's unknown and stuff that's structured and that's unstructured. And we sort of thought this might be a framework for us to start thinking about where we could look at tools and select from tools in those areas. The framework itself is applied, in real life in some sort of a cycle. We tend to go through a series of processes. So, for example, you might have a brainstorming session or a personal thing or group sessions, you articulate things. But we did think that anybody's going to go through some kind of a process of iterative construction and thinking through tools. The cycle, I think, was the second part of what we thought about. And then the third piece that was emerging from here was the idea of I think what we called a configuration.
yes, we were not sure what to use,
Yeah,
but that was one of the words we floated.
but I think it was the idea behind the configuration is, how do you select and organize your tools? They help you move through this process of activity. And so given that we had this three-step framework, the cycle, the configuration, it then became a question of, okay, so in that case, in order to understand this more effectively, what kind of example might work? Now, I think when we finish the conversation offline, we start having some ideas about the kinds of things that might be there. But and I mentioned the career strategy thing as one possible example. But the thing we should probably do at this stage is say, okay, if we wanted to look at a list of examples, what kind of techniques could we use to make sure we don't just say something and then coalesce very quickly around that particular idea? So this is where I think some of your tools around perhaps making lists or thinking of kind of associations could be interesting because, to start off with, how associations, you know, I have my own approaches and my words are going into, but let's say we want to think about a list of examples. How would you go about that particular approach? What sort of tools and techniques come to mind as your first, port of call, the first thing you'd reach for at that stage?
Yes, this is, thanks for summing that up again. And it's good that you reminded everyone of the matrix when I prepared for this. So, or what we discussed for a short time after the meeting was that we want to generate a list of examples or generate a list of tools and so on. And what I noticed in preparing for this week is that the framework that you described, or that we described, that we arrived at, this 2x2 matrix, that is only one type of thinking we've been thinking so far about. It doesn't mean that it can't be the basis of the book, but I just wanted to take a moment and to show that. Sorry, let me draw this bigger. So I think this started all from the fact that we said we have something that is muddled in some way, be it because it is unstructured and unknown, because it's something that we are currently actively exploring, as in researching, whether it's something that is unstructured but known, something that we know more implicitly, or that we could talk about when somebody asks some concrete guiding questions, but that we can't put into an overarching framework, or because it's new information we gain from books, lectures, and so on. But for us, at least, it's currently, there's a lot of material that is unstructured. And what we were talking about is to go to a situation where it is structured and it can be shared with other people, or it can be consulted, be that in the form of a narrative. It could also be in the form of a diagram. It could be in the form of a different type of model or framework. So really the matrix that we've been discussing would be an example of such a structure, and that we can then go and talk about. But the act of coming up with ideas, that is actually something different. That is, you showed it in your cycle when you said step one is coming up with the ideas, and then step two is structuring them, and so on. So here, what we really have is something more like, maybe you can think of it like boxes. It is, and every box represents, what does it do here? Every box represents the knowledge that we have. But essentially, all the knowledge is stored away in some form. And if we want to use that, we need to find a way of opening those boxes and let their contents flow to the top, let the contents flow to our consciousness, captured in some way. And then, depending on what we want to do with that, sometimes just getting these ideas, getting these associations is already all we need. Sometimes this is then the first step as the input for the constructing or the structuring bit that we were talking about before. And after I realized that, I noticed that there is at least a third type of thinking, and that is problem solving. Problem as in the term, or problem as defined as something is not how it should be. So you have ideal, and you have how it really is. And somehow these two don't fit together. And now you need to see, well, what can I do to get the real into, yeah, to get it close to the ideal, to get whatever I have to behave in the way that I want it to behave, whether it's a machine, whether it's a company, whether it's another type of system. And I think here again, the thinking that we need to do is different again. We first need to understand the problem. So we need to understand what it is that we need to understand what it is that is not matching and why this is the case. And then we need to generate potential solutions. Oops, generate solutions and test solutions. Now, these three modes of thinking, they're not independent of one another. They can and very often do co-occur. Like, in order to do that, we potentially we might, in order to understand the problem, we might need to gather a lot of real-world data that is then messy, which we need to structure in order to generate solutions. We might need to activate associations, activate knowledge that we already have. Yeah, just something I wanted to share before we move any further. Personally, I think we should continue to focus on this part here for the moment. And just something to notice and to know that there is not necessarily one fit all. Sorry.
I think it's really worth labeling those three so we don't forget them, because I think, again, just from some of the literature I've been reading recently, that first section where you talk about constructing is quite similar again to the sense making literature. You know, we're trying to make sense of things. So I think sense making could be one chunk of that kind of activity. The second chunk is retrieval. That's almost like learning, isn't it? We have knowledge, we're trying to retrieve it, and we're trying to understand and use it. So I think that's a bit closer to the learning side of things as an approach.
This is also closer to brainstorming.
Yeah. And the third is, I think I've already said, it is more problem solving, or and that's obviously a huge space in itself.
Yes.
Now, one of the things that again, just in terms of thinking about words that are relevant here, there is this idea that, does something exist or not? So in the case of the middle model, where we retrieve information, something already exists. It's either encoded in our heads, it's in a book, it's somewhere. The stuff is out there, and the task is to uncover it or peel it back or discover it. Well, to uncover it rather than discover it. In the other two, in the sense-making stage, we may well be creating new knowledge, because yes, we have existing knowledge, but we are creating something new.
Yeah.
And again, in the problem solving, the existing situation, we're creating something new again. So I suppose the difference is the middle one is a reworking. I think it's closer to how do we retrieve and organize existing information, while the other two are about new. Now I don't know how much it matters in terms of the distinctions, but I just know that I was thinking about this in the context of a few conversations where somebody says, "Oh, you're peeling back the layer, you're unfolding something," but the minute you say that, something must already be there. So I think we have to just be clear about, are things already there, or are we creating them through a process of working? And again, these tools will help us in different ways in that situation.
Yes. And you said one thing that this problem solving also creates something new. I don't think this is always the case. Sometimes it is all about the understanding, and which would be potentially utilize sense making. And once you understand it, you actually realize this is an old problem, and there's already a solution for that can be
It might be
applied.
selection, right?
It could be then a selection, yes. Okay, but I think we wanted to focus more on this retrieval, brainstorming, ideation side of things, and what type of solution, or not solution, tools are out there to do that.
Yeah.
And actually, I think this is one of the fields of thinking that is most often talked about, simply because it's relatively easy to show, to do. And a lot of the time it seems to be that we are dealing, for instance, with problems that we already understand quite well, but where we don't have a solution yet. So we try to create a solution by essentially drawing from our knowledge, from what is already inside us. I already wrote down brainstorming here, but that would be a classic technique, and which is, by the way, very interesting, because a lot of the time, one of the criticisms of brainstorming is that very often you just warm up old ideas rather than create something new. But by its very nature, this is what brainstorming is supposed to do. That's why originally the guy who came up with it, his name escapes me at the moment, but one of the rules was that you should have a diverse audience if you want to do brainstorming for creative problem solving, because each person brings their own knowledge, and if they come from a very similar field, maybe they even come from the same company, from the same department, their knowledge will overlap quite a bit. Whereas if they're from different parts of the company or from a completely different field, if you're trying to solve a problem in construction, and you also have a gardener in there, a salesperson, and I don't know, a GP, they will come up with different associations than the engineer would come up with. Whether their association is valuable in this context, not in general, but valuable in this context, that's a different matter again. But yeah, brainstorming is one of those techniques that tries to retrieve existing information. And brainstorming is, of course, a group technique. On my channel, I talked about at least a couple of techniques that you could use as an individual, but you can also use them as in a group. One of them is the ABC list. And there are several variations of the ABC list. There is the classical ABC list, where you essentially just do a simple inventory of what you know. That is you write down the alphabet on the left side, you give yourself a certain amount of time, and then you have a topic, you write down whatever comes to your mind about this topic. I think, no, I'm pretty sure I talked about the envelope technique as well, where you're essentially doing the same, but rather than having one session, you have multiple sessions. You put them, once you've finished, you put them into an envelope or drawer or wherever. And after a couple of days, once you've done it a couple of times, you actually consolidate all of them, which can be useful, because sometimes it actually takes some time to retrieve that information, to open those boxes. It's strange in a way, but our brain, we often don't realize it, but our brain, a large part of what the memory is for is actually to keep our knowledge away from us. Because if everything we ever knew and ever heard was constantly swirling in our heads, we couldn't live our lives, we couldn't react to danger, we couldn't do anything. So that means if you are retrieving that information and you haven't retrieved it for a long time, you will only retrieve some of the information most of the time, unless it is something that has a high saliency, that is somehow very important emotionally or whatever. And but if you think about it a couple of times, then you will actually remember more than the first time around.
Yeah,
That's the ABC list.
I noticed
Yeah.
using the ABC list. There was one example where I think, going through a series of ideas, and it certainly increased the number of ideas I had by about 50%, because I
Mm.
just just starting my writing list was one thing. Doing with the ABC, just the additional letters, and I think you've called it the crossword puzzle effect
Mhm.
before. It certainly accelerates the amount of ideas you have.
Yeah, it's really strange in a way. It does have a name, so we think we understand what it means. We can just give it the name crossword puzzle effect, but really why this should be the case, I don't really know. It just somehow I think I once read that it has something to do with how our brain stores the information, that it stores them by the beginning sound. So if you give it the beginning sound, then you get more out of it. If you try other type of restrictions, such as the ending sound or the number of syllables, it won't work as well as if you give it the beginning sound.
That may have something to do, again, just speculating,
Mm,
with with how important names are to us, because we remember people by names.
mm,
And often, again, I had this just the other day. I was trying to remember somebody's name, and I was looking for the first sound, because I think that would trigger the next bit.
mm,
And it was actually quite hard, because it's like a J sound takes you to John or something like that very quickly. Well,
mm.
if you're the wrong sound altogether, you don't get started.
Yeah. And this is actually also something, the tip of the tongue effect, when something's on the tip of your tongue, but you just can't remember it. One of the tricks you can use to get over that is actually thinking about, well, what sound does it start with? How many syllables does it have? And sometimes, not always, but sometimes that helps you to unblock yourself. Um,
While you're going on with this
yes,
list, I have, I mean, I think if you have any more techniques, it'd be useful to kind of go through them.
yes.
Um, but I'm also wondering whether there's a bit of a nuance here, because our kind of exam question we started this live discussion from was, we need, should we select from a list of examples? And so um, one of the questions that sort of comes to mind to me is, if you think about, oops, about the right section. Yeah, if you think about the the point you're making about brainstorming, the um, the idea that comes to my mind is a big sheet of paper with lots and lots and lots of ideas on there. We're trying and put a lot of ideas out.
Mm,
While in our case, you know, are we looking for a small set of possible topics, and is it like 3 or 4 or 5 topics? Um, so this might be 50 concepts, for example. But in this case, we're looking for a few concepts that possibly, and we're trying to say which ones maybe have the strongest case for them. So that may be a slightly different, or there may be a nuance in
mm.
whether we're looking to evaluate. Well, if we're looking for some options so we can evaluate them, versus are we trying to put everything on the page so we can do a comprehensive assessment?
Well, I don't know how much of how much that they're clashing, because even if you just want a couple of examples, you can start with many more, not necessarily comprehensive list, but just more options so that you can rank them and you can select the best five out of them. Um, whereas I don't know if you're really just looking for 5 options and you stop after the first 5 options, that strikes me as a bit of you might be missing some of the better option. It very often happens that, not always, but the best ideas, they're not the first you think of, but they're the second, third, fourth idea you're thinking of.
Well, I think there's some words there that might be worth pulling in, because there is this thing called satisficing. You know, do you go till it's good enough, or do you go till it's kind of exhaustive? There's a range there.
Yes.
It's sort of, what is, in fact, there's another thing here that's pretty worth bringing in. It's like, what's the stopping rule? At what point is enough enough, and you actually stop?
Yes.
You think you can stop
Yeah.
doing the work.
So one heuristic that helped a lot for me is a time stopping rule. Like especially with ABC, you can come up with a lot of words. Some of them might not be related, but that's okay. And you give yourself 90 minutes, no, 90 seconds, 3 minutes or whatever. And then you see what has come up. And so you can evaluate this. And if I'm looking for 5 ideas, among those ideas I've come up with, are those five ideas already in there? Are they already good enough? If yes, then I can stop here. I can select them and I can move on. If no, then maybe I need to do it again, or maybe I need to use some other techniques. So which is, again, it's not taking the first 5 ideas that come to mind, but it's also not exhaustive. It's sort of, what is that, satisficing?
Yeah, satisficing. It's like a term that basically says, you go
I
on
know
till
what it means.
yeah.
It's sort of like exhausting, but satisfying. But it's just something it's an opposite, but
It's like just enough, isn't it? It's like,
yeah.
I've looked at 3 options. Yeah, that's good enough. I don't need to look at the other 15 to really make my choice. Well,
Yeah,
the
I mean,
exhaustive is look at all.
sometimes that's all you need. But if I guess especially in a situation like ours, where we at least want to have some substance from which we can choose, so that we can, it might not be what we choose in the end might not be the best possible, but at least we have some confidence that it is at least not completely irrelevant. I would not go with the bare minimum. I would also not go with the maximum, because that's probably too much, but something in the middle.
So going back to kind of your list, you had the ABC list with the 2 kinds of lists. Did you do any other techniques come to mind? I've got a few that I can also bring in once you're finished with your list.
Yes, there are actually quite a few. There is the carver, which is very close to the ABC list, where you have, instead of the whole alphabet, you only have a subset of the letters of the alphabet that belongs to one word, and you could write them on the left and then just do it like a mini ABC list, but usually you write it. I like to do it with these type of balloon letters, but you don't need to. And then you associate based on those letters. You can have 0 or more associations per letter. And you would think that this would generate very similar ideas to the ABC list. But in practice, I found it doesn't. I don't know what it is. Maybe it would if you write it on the left side. I don't usually work with that on the left. Maybe it has something to do with the fact that the letters are arranged in a different way, that it triggers some different associations in your brain. It might also be the fact that you don't have all letters available. And if you want to add a thought, sometimes it's easy, but sometimes it's very difficult, because you at least need to think, oh, the way I want to say it doesn't work. Can I say it a different way? And sometimes it actually takes several minutes or longer to think about, well, how can I actually put this into the list? And maybe this extra bit of mental effort brings out new associations, especially you're trying different things. To hook that word or that expression onto onto your main word. And by doing that, you're already generating more associations, and some of those associations might trigger further associations that you would not have had otherwise. But it can also be more frustrating, definitely, if you can't find a way to add your ideas to the main word. And technically, you have the inventory and envelope again. I guess the inventory and envelope, that's really, you can do that with all type of techniques. Right. So there are lots of other group techniques that I know about. We already mentioned brainstorming. That is either done on a whiteboard or everybody writes that. Well, actually, I think that's what I wanted to say now is technically brain writing. In the brainstorming, everybody says their ideas and somebody writes it on a board. The brain writing is everybody gets 5 or 10 minutes at the beginning, and then they write as many ideas as possible on little note cards, and then afterwards they're put on the board and people explain why they had the idea. Although sometimes people also call that brainstorming, and that's, yeah, there's not a
I
strict
was going to
rule
mention the
between them.
brain, I think a version of the brain writing, because I'm correct, I've got a book somewhere here which is about that technique.
Mhm.
It was like sort of very similar, but I think called Crawford slips, which again are small slips of paper,
Mhm.
and use those to write one idea, or one sentence. And the idea of having little atomic slips of paper as part of your workflow, they're not kind of permanent, but they're essentially, you hand them out to people and they write some ideas. Then you get these individual pieces of ideas which you can then arrange and move around and process.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that with all of these techniques, there are lots of variations, lots of little variations where you then think, well, is that already a new technique, or is that just a variation on the existing techniques? I remember that before we started this live stream, you already mentioned the Crawford flips method, and you showed me how you're using them.
Yeah. Well, yes, I think I came across them as part of, essentially there's few PDFs and articles out there, and one book that talk about the idea that you take an A4 sheet of paper and you cut it into 8 slips, it's A7 size little slips. So it's a cheap way of creating lots of slips of paper rather than using index cards. And then the idea behind them is, because they're quite small, use them for specific for what atomic units of ideas, I guess. So one sentence, you can even construct an entire essay by just writing one sentence at a time on these cards, and then shingling them, putting them in order to give you a series of notes. And again, as an example, I've got a pile of notes here that are all just different pieces that I've
Maybe
written.
if you switch your camera so that
Well, I
then
won't
it's easier
show
to see if you want to
now
show
because
that.
yeah, I have got the document camera going, but I
Okay.
might show that in a different technique, because I do find that while I'm using it, there is this kind of tension which is there in all of these systems between so as you increase the number of items you're trying to deal with, the connections obviously increase massively, and so the complexity increases with I think it's the exponential of the number of connections between these various items. So if you have 60 slips of paper with ideas on them, suddenly you have an organization problem. How do I put those ideas into kind of a shape to work with? So I think that's one thing that I've just about a story. When I was first doing the MBA, we all the new students were introduced into the first time we were meeting each other. So they did a bit of an ice-breaking kind of task for everybody, and they said, "Look, there's I think it was something like there's a traffic accident, And there's a series of events that happen leading up to the traffic accident. And they give us lots of these individual points of things that were, items you deal with. And they told us in the room, you need to put these in order. You need to sequence them and figure out what to do and how to think about them. Now, the minute we started doing that, it was very clear that you're trying to compare and contrast every slip to every other slip to see if it's before or after. So suddenly it's like a big sorting problem. You're trying to sort all this information into, and because there's 30 pieces of information, sorting 30 things manually does take some time. And so one of the things that I did quite quickly was say, okay, rather than doing it this way, let's create 3 big buckets first. There is a beginning, a middle, and an end. So something happened, something in the middle, something in the end. First, try and sort these into the right buckets, and so you do the process of trying to organize them into 3 big buckets first, and then you end up with 30 items, but there might be 10 in each one. And it's much easier to sort 10 things individually than it is to sort 30 things in one go. So I think that's kind of related to this idea of how we do brainstorming. So one of the techniques that we haven't mentioned here that I've come across is in David Hiley's book on thinking maps. So he's kind of taken a brainstorming kind of technique, but changes slightly. So the idea might be, our exam question here is, what's the topic we want to use that is the focus for our conversation? The example we want to use. So rather than the topic, it's what's the example that we want to use. So you would draw the thing in the middle, and then you'd write the ideas around them. So for example, we had the career idea, and then you'd write other ideas, and you'd position them fairly close together. So let's say there was an idea that was similar to the career, which might be, applying for a job as an example. So we're trying to use that. So you end up with a whole bunch of examples of things that may be related to each other. And then what I think was interesting was there's another layer to this. We draw another circle around all these ideas, and then you can say, well, this collection relates to this topic, and that collection relates to that topic. It tends to organically build out if you've put things roughly close to each other in terms of ideas. So then your 30 topics here might become 5 big topics. There's an intrinsic selection process. So
the red squiggles, they represent chunking essentially.
Yes,
You're not generating new ideas, but you're trying to
you're chunking. So again, I think the process that we're sort of going through is the generation. So in fact, there is a generation step, and then, as you put it, a chunking step, and then the chunking step is maybe a selection step. Something like that is what I think we're trying to work through with these models.
And I think this is also a very good example of how the different types of thinking that I outlined up here are interwoven, because the chunking and the sorting, that is already part of or could be seen as part of the construction of the sense making. Especially your example from your MBA with trying to organize what was happening in a temporal order. That is constructing a timeline. That is making sense of the individual pieces of information. You implied like a 2-step process with a rough sorting and then a fine sorting, which is I don't even know whether that needs to have its own technique or own name or whatever, but it is just sort of this is potentially, depending on where it comes from, where these 30 pieces of narrative come from. This could be an example of, again, ideation, retrieval, or it could, of course, be a different type of process that might not be very cognitively demanding as such. It might be more going around and asking people, but it might also be another, even if it's not retrieval or sense making, might be another important or demanding task. But yeah, this is how like you can't really separate one from the other cleanly.
Now, do we want to, select a technique and maybe use it as an example to work out the example we wanted, or what do you think would be helpful at this point? Trying to think about more techniques, or maybe
Yes.
using the time to try a
What's
technique for say
the?
5 minutes.
We already the time really flew
The
this
time always
this time.
flies.
Yeah. And yes, that's a good point that we use our remaining time to actually generate some ideas. We mentioned it before that everybody is drawn to a special set of tools that they like using more than others. Sometimes for no particular reason. When I start something like that, I'm always drawn to ABC list. So if I was the person to suggest it, I would suggest ABC list. What is the technique you are drawn to that you usually reach for?
I think for this particular examples, this is where I went back to, you know, uh, I'm probably trying to think about a few as opposed to many. So I think the quantity would bias me towards selection here. So if I was doing a exhaustive, every single thing we could think about, I would probably reach for the ABC list now because I found that a very, very useful brainstorming tool. I think it's better than the other brainstorming tools I've used before on just maybe making lists and just filling a page full of stuff. But for the specific point that we have here, which is, the example that we're talking about, and it might be that we can do an A/B test here, where if you use your screen, I use mine. The technique I would probably select is just a circular list like this, So there's a constraint in there of about 4 or 5 items because you can only write so many in a circle. But I would probably move towards a satisficing approach to select 4, 5, 6 ideas because the next thing for me would be, well, if I have 6 ideas, I would probably select from that the one where I felt we had the strongest, personal experience, and the one that perhaps had the most value to the reader, to the most number of readers. So we could try this.
So
you could do this side by side potentially, or it depends on how you would approach the.
Of course, you mentioned A/B testing before, but that of course only means something if you have a clear rule by which you can say which one is better, which I don't think we have in this case.
No,
As long
I
as
don't think we have. I think it's
no,
more
but
simultaneous.
it's actually it might be nevertheless interesting to use two approaches. Actually, what I would have suggested is that we use two approaches, that both of us use one approach and then both of us use another approach. We could also say each of us starts with whatever they're comfortable, and then we're switching over or something like that.
It's interesting one that, isn't it? Because let's say we used an ABC list. I know it'll work. The kind of so just even having this conversation right now, what I would reach for is something like kind of a pros and cons list. So for ABC, if I look at the pros of it, I do think it's exhaustive. I know it'll give us a whole list of reasons. The cons for me is we are going to commit some time to it. It'll take us 20, 30 minutes to do it properly. When I've done it personally, the time flies. We could easily spend 20 minutes doing the ABC list, and obviously you've got to create the list and so on to start off with. With something like the circular technique, obviously the pro is that it's quick. You can sort of get going straight away. The cons is it's the opposite. So to some extent you have they're not really comparable techniques because they're possibly for different end cases at the same, in a way. So I think you're right. It's not within these techniques, I don't think we're trying to demonstrate one is better than the other. I think we're trying to show that there are these different techniques, and goes back to kind of our very first point. The techniques sit within a framework of information. They sit within a cycle, um, and maybe the configuration that we're using. This is where the drivers are. Do you want to be exhaustive or quick? Could be um, a selection criteria. If you want to do something quite quickly, you might choose one over the other. Is it visual versus text? There might be a whole series of criteria for why you choose your configurations that in turn depend on the people or the person using this and their kind of preferences and knowledge. So yeah, I think we're trying to show but not compare, and we're certainly not trying
Yes.
to evaluate in terms of better or worse. It's just here are some techniques.
Yes.
So having said
Yeah.
all that, maybe we should have a try with well, why don't you pick a technique you would use? Let's use that together and use that for this example.
Yeah. I mean, as I said, I would go with the ABC list, but I would prevent it from becoming exhaustive by limiting the time.
Yeah.
90 seconds is always a great first burst of associations.
Okay. Well, do you want to make the list? Do you want me to make the list?
Um, what we could do is we could each do our own list in 90 seconds, and then afterwards we just compare. But what I found with using that in as a group technique, it's usually the comparing that takes the longest time.
Right.
But yeah, so I would draw an ABC on my side, you on your virtual canvas.
So when we're ready, I'll set a timer for 30 seconds, then we can both
Yep.
write.
And then we should be clear though on what exactly we are looking for ideas at the moment. We are looking for ideas on how where we can show how um, sort
I
of
think
how you select a configuration, right? We are not at the moment looking for ideas for tools, for techniques, but we're actually looking for examples where you would use this technique with and where you would need a configuration of several tools. That's my understanding. Is that also your understanding?
I think rather than the configuration, I would have probably said the cycle is the thing. So, the context we're looking for. So the example has to be a thread that runs through the entire book. So it's
Yes.
probably something that says, here is a use case. In this situation, there is a series of, of events that happen. There is a cycle we go through, and in that cycle, we have to select configuration of tools. But it's the cycle probably that we're selecting for. So again, going back to the example that I'll probably write we already had was, designing a career. A career has cycle in terms of, the early stages is the selection of, maybe what you want to study, the first job. For me, that there's a very clear cycle in that. So that was my kind of example as starting point. But again, maybe we don't need to, well, again, maybe we disagree, but it's somewhere in the space. We want an example that allows to demonstrate this entire
Yes.
framework cycle configuration.
Okay, that's
So
fine. I just wanted to know that not that I'm doing one thing, you're doing another thing, and at the end we have two completely different lists. But yeah, as long as we are both on the same page with we want to find some examples that demonstrates this whole thing, then
yeah,
I think we're good to go.
okay. Well, I'll just find where I'm on the page and then ready, steady, go. Spend 90
Okay.
seconds. Right, the time has gone off.
Okay, I just finish this one word. Cool.
Perfect. How the
Then
visible my stuff
you want to
goes.
start. We're almost at the end. We might not. We might need to pick this up again next time, but maybe
Yeah.
can already
We
start. How many ideas did you have, by the way? Just as a
So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
okay. I have 7.
Okay. Well, should I talk through mine very quickly, and then you can
Yes.
go through yours. So I was thinking the first one for me, I thought was a career model because, as I mentioned before, it feels
Mm,
like something that goes on through life. Um, the next one that came to mind was business planning. So again, business strategy, business planning has lots of examples, I think, of where you're in different situations. You could show examples of different meetings you're with people and do that. Um, children came to mind. Again, you can work with kids in different situations, trying to help
mm,
them understand things. That can be a good model for how do you sit down and talk to kids about these different sorts of topics, that might be important. So mobile phones, for example, these emotive things where very different views, how do you talk about them?
mm,
I think education planning, again, could use as part of studying. So study could be a good example all the way through for students who have to go through different levels of education. Investment choices. So again, investments, money decisions, that's a big decision-making area. Again, going back to sort of a business example, the process improvements. How would you know, improve different aspects of services and operations? Strategy is again a business-related thing, I suppose, but how it might help with strategic thinking was my bottom one, and then the last one was, could you use it for thinking about travel? So, maybe there's a thing around an example of we're traveling somewhere. How do we make the different decisions in
mm.
different examples? So, yeah, those things sort of came to mind. How about you?
Yes, that's good. While you were saying them, I just had another idea, which I also wrote down quickly. Okay, um, I think mine are slightly more concrete, but it's sort of go in the same direction. Some of them come from my own personal experience, like the first one, experimental techniques. That is about the techniques that I've used. I'm trying to build a framework for them to select them more carefully, or rather also see blind spots that haven't been tried yet by the literature, by other studies. Then the next one is an interesting one, identity crisis, a specific type of identity crisis, um, where need to work through, you essentially need to reassemble a different framework of who you are to overcome this identity crisis. Then the next one is learning, which goes with your education. I said learning neuroscience, but it could be anything. Then a novel, that would be um, arriving at the plot for a novel. Um, product vision, that goes with your a strategy and business planning. So this would be especially at the beginning. It could be with any new product. Actually, you would need to go through that with any new product, but you can also have that at the beginning of the company. Then the same research vision, where do you want to go long term? Teaching, that also goes with education, but from the opposite side, teaching something you already know. And then finally, again, is something very specific, understanding different desktop environments, which is something actually I worked through quite recently, as in what are the benefits, and or when would you choose a certain type of a desktop paradigm compared to a different other type of desktop paradigm. Yeah, that's just something very specific.
Although, when you say desktop, do you mean like a operating system or a
I mean,
physical
something
desk?
like GNOME versus
Right.
something more similar to traditional Windows versus
Yeah.
Mac versus, I don't know, a tiling window manager, something like that.
Yeah. That's a good point. I mean, as a diehard Linux person, I'd be going, Linux is the best all the way through, but yes, within that there are many window managers and stuff you can choose from.
Yeah, I've just recently transitioned to Linux over the past year, so everything is fresh in my mind, and I actually did uh, a lot of figuring out, because a lot of people, they know one little thing and say this is the best and everybody should use that, and they don't look left and right, and then it's very difficult to choose which is the best for me in my situation. So, but anyway, um,
So we have a couple of overlaps, fewer overlaps, I think, than not very many overlaps. It looks like the majority are different. And if I look at kind of your examples
mm,
there, you come from what feels like a bit more a science, research kind of lens with some of the examples you've had. You've seen, I guess that fits you with your background as a scientist. And mine comes more from a business kind of approach, which again fits in my background more as a consultant
by
and
the way,
business developer.
so I just wrote down product development. I had
Yeah,
product vision, but if you now that you mentioned my background, of course, I also have an engineering background, so
yeah,
that would also fit this. But yeah, I think you're very right. And this is what I mentioned before with the brainstorming. Why for brainstorming, you usually want to have more diverse participants, because everybody brings their own background. Everybody
yeah.
brings the ideas related to their background.
So in fact,
Um,
from this situation, I'm almost going to say, if you think about the ABC list, if we, and if there is a science background that you certainly have that I don't,
mm,
there's perhaps, a bit of a business background, which is more mine. But actually, the points where there's probably the great overlap, again, we haven't done an exhaustive thing in here, but just listening
mm,
to it, the biggest overlap in here for us is things like process improvements, product strategy, business strategy, business planning. I think the commonality for us is the engineering mindset because we're both
mm,
engineers. It is how do we make this work is probably the core thing. It's probably not pure research for the sake of research. It's probably not
mm,
pure business for the kind of for the pursuit of profit in the sense of the traditional here's the money situation. I think we're quite interested how do we make this work in practice with the real problems that we have day to day.
mm.
So that may help us narrow down, from our criteria. Well, again, I'm jumping ahead here because maybe this is the next time's conversation about how do we select. And
I
we've had
think
some
so, yes.
ideas, but it seems to me that the selection criteria will be here's a bunch of things, but you know what the criteria we use to select has to be based on what we think a is a topic or an approach we can live with for the next year. So it
Mm,
depends on us and how we feel about it.
exactly. We sort of have the tension of it needs to be something that we know well enough,
Yeah,
but that also interests enough people. Or maybe that is something we also should think about. Who is actually our target audience? Do we have a general target audience? Will we be targeting more engineers for the first book at least? Or who? Yeah, that's another couple of rounds I think we need to turn before we can do that. And I think part of the selection process is actually getting clear on that.
yeah,
Um, yeah, but I think your summary is quite good. I think this Venn diagram with the engineering in the middle, that and business and science on either side, that's a nice. Yeah, I think this can be a nice guiding, um, sort of like a guiding diagram. But I also think we need to start a discussion on this next time. Though, in the meantime, maybe we will have even some other ideas that we can also bring and then continue there.
absolutely. So I mean, again, just taking a step back to kind of where we are,
Mhm.
we've sort of in a position where going back to kind of our frameworks, I suppose, what have we done so far? We've looked at our situation, we've selected a tool, we've applied the tool, and then now we're sort of saying, okay, so what does that mean? And I think again, you mentioned the Linux example, but it always comes back to me. It's like we've currently we've taken some action. We don't know exactly that the action was going to be, but we've taken some action. We've selected a tool. We have a problem. we've applied it, we've tried it in one way, you know, there's the 90-second ABC is a specific tool that we selected for this. And again, like in most of our conversations, I think we have a lot of time in the hour. We have spent 45 minutes or so talking around the
Yes.
subject, trying to understand it, which is fine. But the application of the tool itself doesn't take very long. It is 90 seconds. Sit down, do it like this. And then once you've done that, take a step back and then reflect, you know, on what you've just done.
I think the sense making is the thing that really takes the longest time,
Yeah,
which would be the matrix part of the framework that we have. Whereas generating ideas, that is the quickest part. And once you have a framework, it becomes quicker. At the beginning, everything is where is the like I drew it at the beginning. In the beginning, everything is muddled,
yeah,
and in order to bring it to something that is structured that we can then talk about, this process of sense making, this is the really iterative and time consuming
yeah.
part.
Which I think is really insightful here because this is slow, but if you take the time to do this, this is quick. You know, once you've
Yes,
made the choices, it's quite quick. And then the reflection, you know, results in learning, which then goes back into the next stage of sense
that
making. So I think that's,
that actually reminds me of something. I will say it now before I forget it, even though we're slightly over time. A project I did during my BEng. That was during the final year. It was a group project. We had to find a gap in the market, design a solution for it, and then write a business plan and all of that. And in the end, we pitched it in a Dragon's Den type style to some of them were lecturers, some of them were local business people, and so on. So at the beginning, our group at least, we really took a long time to decide on which project we want to pursue, as in sort of weighing the pros and cons. Is that a good gap? Is that a good gap? What are the, and we had different ideas, but afterwards, once we had taken the time to really think through it and had reached a decision, everybody was behind the decision and everybody knew why we had taken a decision. And then afterwards, nobody questioned it anymore and said, "Oh, but I thought, but I think we should have uh, decided for a different gap in the market." So
yeah.
yeah, that helped a lot.
Well, what's interesting there, I think, is this is the contrast. I think this is the right thing to do for us to do the sense making because then the action is quick. What often happens is people don't want to spend the time doing this. So instead, they try and jump quickly into action. And then instead of it generating learning, I think what tends to happen is you then get stuck
Yes.
because the action you're taking is not, as you say, people aren't pulling in the same direction. You know, there's internal tensions, people aren't aligned. There might even be for internal sabotage. People don't pull their ground. So these are choices. By going through and using tools like the ones we're talking about to help with the sense making, action, reflection, learning becomes a virtuous cycle. Well, trying to go quickly to action actually is the opposite. You know, yes, you're fast to action, but then you're slow in the execution because you get stuck in the process. You
Yes.
haven't, you know, you just rewind and start again.
You're
So
either slow or you're shallow. And
yeah,
then both of that in the end is not really what you need in a lot of times.
absolutely.
So
Yeah, I agree with you. This is a good place for us to stop, I think. It's a
I
good
think so
point.
too. That's a natural stopping point. Thanks again, Karthik. I hope that our viewers find this interesting as well. I at least learn a lot.
It's enjoyable
And
conversations, so it helps us. Hopefully, it helps you know the people watching as
exactly,
well.
ideally, it's a win-win situation.
Yeah,
Um, so yes, for anybody watching, if you have any ideas, questions, suggestions, or whatever, just let us know in the comments, and we will continue this. Actually, in 2 weeks, I might not be here. Maybe in 3 weeks, we can talk about this offline, and then I can let everybody know.
I think if people are watching this and they would like to actually know what the live streams, it might be worth you know dropping a comment and we might start a mailing list people. If there's enough interest, obviously even if people aren't available when we are, the content
Yes.
is there to watch. But if somebody wants to actually know when things are happening, let us know.
Actually, one thing I started doing today is we're doing this via Zoom, and I have the AI companion running to see whether it generates any good condensed version of what we were talking about. We might also want to send that around if people are interested in joining a mailing list.
Yeah.
And yeah, then they can look at it and decide whether they want to watch the whole live stream or not.
Makes sense.
Okay, so thanks for watching, and until